It's Wednesday, November 10th, 2016. You're listening to 3000 NFL Mock Draft. As said, it's November 10th, 2016. Just another normal day in America. I guess thankfully we're doing 50% of this podcast in the UK, as I am with Rob Staten, as always, of Seahawks-Draftblog.com, as we get together every week, even on the tough weeks here in the stateside, and talk about the NFL draft, the Seattle Seahawks, the NFL, and college football. And, sometimes maybe we'll mix it up with some other categories out there outside of the world of sports, but doubtful. I think that if you're listening to this podcast, you probably want to get away from other things going on in the world right now. So we're going to talk about the Seahawks and their close win over the Buffalo Bills, preview their game against the New England Patriots. We'll talk Huskies. We'll talk college football. We'll talk playoffs. We'll talk prospects. We'll talk draft. And we can just kick it off with the most obvious of those things, which is the Seahawks' 31-25 win over the Buffalo Bills on Monday night. They've kept it close once again. And if you look at their schedule, I mean, come on. They had a game-winning drive in the final seconds to win against the Miami Dolphins. They had a game-winning potential drive that fell short against the LA Rams in week 2. They had a game-winning drive that they had to stop versus the Atlanta Falcons. They had a 6-6 tie. They had a 20-25 loss on a final throw to the end zone that was probably completable if Russell Wilson throws it about a yard shorter. And they had to stop another one against the Buffalo Bills. So the Seahawks sit at 5-2-1, first place in the NFC West, a 2-game division lead in the NFC West. And it's Pete Carroll's second best record at the midway point with the Seahawks. So in terms of where they stand in the NFC, it can't get much better. You'd like to think of them as, maybe a 7-1 team or a 6-2 team or something like that. But they are where they are, and they can only sort of grow from that. And I think you got to be grateful that as they've sort of dealt with injuries to Michael Bennett and Cam Chancellor and Luke Wilson and Russell Wilson, and Thomas Rawls, and the list goes on, that they've managed to survive with this many wins. And I think the defensive problems that we've noted in the last 3 weeks, it's not a coincidence that Michael Bennett has been injured. It's not a coincidence that Cam Chancellor has missed the last 4 games, which is when they've given up the most points. And so they will get Cam Chancellor back next week against the New England Patriots. But Rob, in their 31-25 win over the Bills on Monday night, when they were down so many players against the Bills, what were your expectations going up against a team that was sort of hard to pin down? Buffalo has had their really great moments this season. They've had their bad moments this season. They fired a coordinator in the middle of the season. Sometimes the offense has carried them. Sometimes the defense has carried them. So we didn't really know what sort of team we were going to get. But it was sort of a classic Pete Carroll-ish team with Tyrod Taylor, the quarterback, and a tough running game with LaShawn McCoy. You could compare it to sort of that, but Seattle had their way with the offense and the passing game. So what were your expectations going into the game, and what were you surprised by in the game?
Well, my expectation going into the game was really just for the Seahawks to win. I didn't really have any idea how they were going to do it. I could have imagined a scenario where it was a pretty comfortable win. I also could have imagined a scenario which is what played out, where it was really, really close and it came down to the last play. I mean, you could probably argue, in fact, there's no probably about it, you definitely could argue that the Bills deserved to win the game. But I think it was a tough win. A good win. I thought it was a really great game overall. Really entertaining. The national feeling is that that the NFL is having a bit of a down year. That there are no great teams. That we're not seeing great primetime matches. And I'm a little bit surprised that the discussion points have been all about sort of Richard Sherman's potential penalty after the game and not about the quality of the game. Tyrod Taylor playing fantastically. LaShawn McCoy basically playing with an injured hamstring and looking as good as he did. The way that the Bills were able to really, give the Seahawks a blooded nose on the road on Monday Night Football, and the way the Seahawks played. Russell Wilson with another really good performance, despite the fact he's still not 100%. Jimmy Graham, catching the 2 touchdown passes with one hand and hurdling defenders and just looking fantastic. And Cliff Avril having a big game as well. I mean, I would have thought that would have been worth talking about this week because there's been so much negativity about the NFL. What surprised me about it, I think, was perhaps the success the Bills had on third down. The inability of the Seahawks defense, which is full of speed, especially in the front seven, to contain not only the quarterback but the running back as well. It seemed like they did a better job than anybody has done probably since 2012 of bouncing plays out wide, stretching plays out, and getting success. There was one thing that really stood out to me in the game was the difficulty the Seahawks had getting off blocks. So whether it was a defensive lineman trying to break free to get into the backfield, whether it was the linebackers trying to get away from a tight end or a receiver just to make a tackle on McCoy or to Tyrod Taylor. All night it seemed they had trouble getting off blocks at every single level. That was really surprising because I haven't really seen that from this team. But what we have seen from them time and time again is just a will to win and a way to get things done. And they've had, 4 home games now. Could easily be 1-3, and yet they're 4-0. And I think that just shows how much character is in this team. I think that they're typically stating the obvious to suggest they're a second half of the season team. They outlast other teams because they are physically fitter, more superior, mentally stronger. They get better in the second half of the year when other teams wear down. That's probably going to happen again. So the fact that they've won 5 of their first 8 games and only lost 2 others is really testament to this team. They've had to battle adversity. They're in a really good position now. I think 6-2 in the second half of the year, or even 7-1 is possible. And if they do that, then there's a very good chance they'll be the number 2 seed, and they may be the number 1.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, playing the Buffalo Bills, I think they played against LaShawn McCoy pretty well. I think they did a nice job against him on defense. I think people would be surprised to really look at the whole picture and realize how good of a job the defense really did do, even though they did have such problems for third down, even though they did give up 30 first downs. The fact of the matter is, the first touchdown was nothing. Those points aren't on the defense. That was a blocked punt that was set up at the 1 yard line, or whatever. That right there, is one thing where you're saying, okay, they were playing against some pretty good players and they gave up a lot of first downs, but the defense, if you take that out, gave up 18 points or whatever. And then the next drive was like a 10-minute drive that was really brutal on the defense and everything. But overall, I think that they, did pretty well. And you say, for them to give up 30 first downs, but only, 2 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns is, pretty good. And, I think that that's something that, should be taken into account as well. So I think that overall stuff on the defense will only improve with Cam Chancellor coming back next week. But I think the other thing is the way that Russell Wilson was able to they were able to open up the game and use Russell Wilson to his advantage. And, he was sacked 4 times. But when you look at the players that sacked him, Lorenzo Alexander, Jerry Hughes, Shaq Lawson, and Kyle Williams, and you start to realize, hey, the Bills have a lot of really good players on defense, especially up there at the front 7. So it's not that surprising either to see him get sacked 4 times. So what did you think of the fact of Seattle passing it, 26 times, going for big plays? It is something they're good at because of Jimmy Graham and Doug Baldwin. Excuse me. But given the amount of time that the defense has been on the field over the last 3 games, does it concern you at all moving forward to move to an offense that isn't able to feature the run, or do you think that they are talented enough to make up for that, where they're just going to have to do what they have to do with what they have until Thomas Rawls comes back, and then hopes that Thomas Rawls that can make a difference?
Well, they clearly got the talent to do it. I mean, having Jimmy Graham is looking like the Graham of New Orleans. And, I was very surprised they didn't feature him more in the New Orleans game. It can only be something that New Orleans did, which really sort of disturbed Russell Wilson maybe on the day. In the other games, they've featured him really well. I think he's the second most productive tight end in the NFL right now, and he missed pretty much the first 2 games because he was recovering from injury. So He's looking fantastic. They've still got Baldwin, they've got Lockett, who will get better. Paul Richardson makes the occasional play. Luke Wilson is coming back. So, they've got plenty of weapons there. Wilson is just a terrific quarterback. And, the way that he was playing the other day is really good. I think the only thing that concerns me a little bit is that we know it's not how they want to play. So if they're doing this, they're feeling like they have to do it because they want to run the ball. So they've come to almost a conclusion that for whatever reason, whether it's the offensive line, whether it's Wilson's lack of mobility at the moment, whether it's the players actually playing at running back, probably a combination of all three, actually. They feel like they're not in a position to run the ball effectively. So it's a concern because we know that they wouldn't do this unless they feel they have to. But, there has to be some hope that they're going to improve there. There has to be some hope that when Thomas Rawls gets back, as this offensive line maybe gels a little bit more. Let's not forget that essentially you've got a first-year centre because Justin Britt's never played centre before. You've got George Fant, who's barely played football before, and you've got Jermaine Ifedi, who's a rookie on that offensive line, and Gary Gilliam's, second-year starter and isn't looking particularly great. So Mark Glowinski's in his first year as a starter as well. So it's very raw. They're going to take a bit of time there. Hopefully that will gel. Hopefully Rawls will come back. Wilson become more mobile. They will work that out. I've no doubt that there'll be a better rushing team down the line. It's not a major concern for me, but certainly they could have used it at the end of the game the other day. The fact that they just could not run the ball at all. They gave up on the run. It was a wasted down actually running the ball. Was a little bit unusual, but I do expect they'll get better. And the whole NFC has got flaws right now, Kenny. People will have watched the games on the Sunday without any Seahawks game. They'll have seen teams like Minnesota suddenly look hopeless on offense. The defense doesn't look anywhere near as good. Green Bay losing to a weak road team like Indianapolis, was just looking really horrible in doing so as well. You look at the Eagles are back down to earth with a bang. The Panthers have started winning, but the Falcons, they look strong, really strong some weeks and a little weaker the next. I still think the Cowboys are going to have a slump at some point this year. Everything is going their way at the moment. They should have lost to the Eagles last week. So, all the teams are kind of dealing with some level of adversity. And I would back the Seahawks to overcome that better than pretty much any of the other teams I just mentioned.
I mentioned Shaq Lawson earlier that he had a sack. Obviously, we haven't seen he had a shoulder injury that he was recovering from. Obviously, we haven't seen a lot of Shaq Lawson at this point. He was the first-round pick for the Buffalo Bills, and we talked a lot about him on this podcast last year. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on if you saw anything from Shaq Lawson that you thought was interesting. He has 2 sacks in his last 2 games. He's played in 3 games total. Did you see anything from Shaq Lawson that made you think that this guy is a special player? And did he sort of line up with your expectations of him going into the draft?
I know that he had a couple of stat plays, sacks. And that said, I thought the offensive line did well overall. There were a couple of times where they had some issues. Jerry Hughes has developed into a really fine player, and his relentless pursuit, his speed, everything. He's pretty much the complete pass rusher at the moment, Jerry Hughes. Alexander's chipped in with some sacks this year. I think that's probably a little bit fluky, but and some of it to do with Rex Ryan's scheme. Shaq Lawson, I can't say that he's he leaped off the screen, and he was a funny one, Shaq Lawson, Kenny, because you would kind of look at his stats, and it wasn't a great 40-yard dash. He wasn't a great explosive athlete, but then if memory serves me right, his split was very good for his size. I think he had a really good 3-cone, if memory serves as well. So he kind of had on some tests he did really, really, really well, and on others he didn't do that well. So you kind of want to see how that will translate. He's a really good, strong effort guy as well, which will help him in his career. But yeah, I'll be interested to follow him over the next few weeks now that he's healthy. But I can't say that aside from the plays where he literally recorded a stat, I can't say that he particularly stood out in that game.
Speaking of sacks, it's pretty interesting, some sack totals. Lorenzo Alexander, who also I just mentioned with the Bills, leads the NFL with 10 sacks, and he's a 33-year-old that was not any sort of factor in this league before this season, not really. And, he just sort of has now been placed in this position to really star and stand out for the first time in his career. After that, though, you got Von Miller, usual suspect there at 9.5 sacks. Dee Ford for the Kansas City Chiefs is 9 sacks, and they'll be getting back Justin Houston, I think, next week. So that should be a boon for the Kansas City Chiefs. And then Cliff Avril is tied with him with 9 sacks. Any thoughts on the season that Cliff Avril is having? Is this, I think we can easily point to this as his most successful season, as he's on pace for, 18 sacks. And, he's already, I think, matched his career high. And he's going to, he's playing at, or he's very close to it. He's playing at a level. Do you think that he's playing at a level unlike anything he's ever played at before? Do you think it's just a product of, the opportunity? What are your thoughts on Cliff Avril's season so far?
Well, he's been absolutely fantastic. I mean, the thing with Cliff is that he's always been really good. I mean, you go back to his Detroit days. He's always been really, really impactful in most games that he plays in. And yet, for some reason, he's never kind of had, the big sack numbers. So he's never kind of had that 15 sack season. He's always kind of hovered around 8 to 10 sacks. But he was still sort of having a real big impact on games. And, I think every year that he's been in Seattle, he's not if you can remember when they signed Patrick Kearney and he had a 12 or 13 sack season in his first year, and then he just kind of fell off a cliff. Whereas the actual, Cliff Avril has just consistently been so productive for Seattle. I mean, he and Michael Bennett have played at an extremely high level for such a consistent run. I mean, 2 of the single best free agent pickups of the NFL, probably ever, actually. I mean, the way that they've played and the value that the Seahawks are getting from them. And Avril's, I don't think he's necessarily done anything. It's not like he's maybe achieved a new level this year. I think he's just suddenly getting rewarded for all of the great play that he's had. And the in the past, what might have been a quarterback curry or a bad throw or something like that leads to a stat for somebody else. The splash play from Avril has become a sack play, and to be at 9, I think he's at now already. Potentially, getting up towards 15, 16, or maybe even more than that for the rest of the year. I think it's really good for Cliff. And, there's a lot of talk about Michael Bennett getting a new contract, and I think that'll probably happen in the offseason. The Seahawks have actually got about $18 million at the moment in cap room, which is going to be available for them in the offseason. And unless there is sort of like a free agent out there who they'd really love to go after or a trade, I would imagine that a large portion of that $18 million is going to go to rewarding Michael Bennett and possibly now Cliff Avril as well. I think it'd be very tough for them to reward Bennett and not Avril. And who would begrudge them a bit of extra money if Olivier Vernon has got, I think, 1 or 2 sacks this year and is earning something like $100 million. Well, Cliff Avril and Michael Bennett average $7 million a year. And it's just an absolute bargain for the Seahawks. And I don't think anybody will complain if the Seahawks just give them a bit of a pay rise in the offseason.
Yeah, I mean, if they obviously if anything happened when they had to lose one, obviously with Michael Bennett out, we're seeing what the team looks like without Michael Bennett. And in that time, Frank Clark, he's got 6.5 sacks in 7 games. Frank Clark was someone who in the 2015 NFL draft last year, you talked about as a guy that was extremely talented. And obviously he had his off-field issue that dropped him in the draft and made a lot of fans very uncomfortable with the pick. And we don't talk about that anymore for the reason of, he's a good player, which is fine, but also he hasn't done anything. There's been no stories of him as being anything other than a model citizen, a model teammate. And we can't say for sure what happened that night, but what we can say is as long as he avoids any other incident for the rest of his career and the rest of his life, then there's no other incident. And that's all we can really say. So, as far as the play on the field, though, Frank Clark has a sack in 5 of his 7 games, at least 1. So he's playing really well. And do you see Cliff Avril as a complete player? Do you see him solely as a pass rusher? Do you think that, he is sort of fitting a nice role in the team and he's doing the best that he can, without as much responsibility? Or with this preview now of Michael Bennett not being in the game, can Frank Clark be, your featured defensive end / pass rusher?
Well, Avril, I mean, to consider that he's listed at about 260, is incredible to think what he does. setting the edge and not just being a great pass rusher. But he's not Bruce Irvin, is he? I mean, he doesn't come in on the passing downs and just go to town. I mean, he plays pretty much every type of situation for Seattle. So, I mean, it's a testament to his quality that he does that at 260. Frank Clark, I thought Frank Clark was so good the other night. And he came really close to having sort of like a 2 or 3 sack night. And I think you just have to, credit Tyrod Taylor, because I think there was one sack actually where Frank Clark hurdled the running back who was in to protect. So he beat his man off the edge. He gets into the backfield. He hurdles like Jimmy Graham, the running back. And just as he's about to drag Taylor down, Tyrod Taylor just sort of scrambles away and just dodges the tackle. I think he may have got an arm to him, but he stays on his feet and he completes a pass. And I remember at the time watching it and thinking, if Frank Clark completes that sack, that's the sack of the season. That gets replayed over and over again. The ability to win off the edge, then hurdle another blocker and still make the play would have just been incredible. It's the type of thing that, you'd expect someone like JJ Watt to do. I mean, it was just incredible. And for him to be, I think he's on 6.5 sacks already as well. We're really only starting to see the making of Frank Clark. I mean, he was, the incident dominated his pre-draft situation. I remember Kenny, I think me, you, and Danny Kelly or Jackson did some podcasts about this whole thing before the draft. But if you actually just watched his play for Michigan, I mean, he was incredible. I mean, he was everything about him was a top 10 talent. The tape was brilliant. He played with intensity. He played with a real high motor, with extreme athleticism. He went to the combine and just blew everybody away, with an elite workout at the combine. Fantastic athlete, great size. And he just had this cloud hanging over him. Now, some people, I know a lot of people actually were not happy with this, and I'm talking about Seahawks fans here, were not happy that they drafted him, but it has gone very quiet, that story now, and people have moved on. I think some people might not have accepted it per se, but I think people are willing to give the Seahawks the benefit. I think there is some credit there from the Seahawks. They're not the type of team, they didn't sign Greg Hardy, for example. They're a team that has probably got credit with its fans, and that's why they could make a move like that. And Frank Clark right now, I mean, he's not been in trouble at all. He seems like a good teammate. He seems like a blossoming core player, or could be a core player 2 or 3 years down the line. And I cannot wait to see what he's going to do next. I mean, if he gets to 10 sacks this year, bear in mind that's kind of what Cliff Avril and Michael Bennett have been at throughout their entire time at Seattle. If he can get to that in year 2, I mean, he's just such an exciting player. And hopefully he can keep this up, because at the moment, he and Cliff Avril and Michael Bennett look like possibly the best trio of pass rushers in the NFL.
Well, right now, Frank Clark is on pace for, between 13 and 14 sacks, and that's, missing a game. So we'll sort of see what happens next. But, they're going to need that sort of pass rush against Tom Brady and the New England Patriots next Sunday night. Another primetime game for the Seahawks. I think that's, 3 in the last 4 weeks. They certainly have not non-delivered. They've delivered. Yeah, okay. They've delivered to fans, I guess, in the last 2 weeks. Well, depending on your opinion of a 6-6 tie, I thought it was interesting. Not happy about it, but it was certainly interesting. And then this Monday night against the Bills. But so they'll be playing the New England Patriots, and Tom Brady. Like I was saying, if you can sack Tom Brady, that's certainly going to make a pretty big difference in how you play against the New England Patriots and defend them. If you go back to the end of last season, the Patriots started last season 10-0. They lost 4 of their last 6 games. People rarely seem to talk about that. And then obviously they lost after 2 games in the playoffs. So they lost 5 of their last 8 games. And in those games, Brady was sacked something like 22 times. He was sacked multiple times in each of those games, sometimes 3 times, sometimes 4 times. So if you can sack Tom Brady, he's been, unbelievable to open this season, coming back from suspension over the last 4 games to throw 12 touchdowns and no interceptions. The Patriots are the 3rd team in NFL history to go 8 games to open the year without throwing an interception, joining the 1960 Cleveland Browns and the 2008 Washington Redskins, actually, with Jason Campbell, surprisingly enough. But I think Brady is due for some interceptions, and it might not come this weekend. But certainly the Seattle Seahawks are by far the best defense that he's faced since returning, and the best pass defense for sure since returning, and probably the best pass rushing team that he's faced. So it's going to be a different game for Tom Brady, though I think that you're still going to get perhaps the best quarterback in the NFL. But if they can get to him, that's going to make a difference. If they can sort of bother, and give some coverage, to their receivers, that's going to be their most difficult time is, having a elite quarterback just pick you apart on those third downs. If you're going to get picked apart like they have over the last, few weeks, this week is Tyrod Taylor. Is Tyrod Taylor a great quarterback? I think, he's very good. But obviously it's going to be a different story with Tom Brady. And, the way that they have been using Martellus Bennett with Rob Gronkowski, the Seahawks are not great against tight ends once again this year, though I think there's improvement. There's still some, problems that they've obviously shown in the last few weeks, as we have already been discussing. So the New England Patriots, everybody says that they're the best team in the NFL. That might be true. They're 7-1. Their one loss came with Jacoby Brissett versus the Buffalo Bills. That was a 16-0 loss, but everything else has been pretty well. But I still look at it, and you look at their schedule, and they're beating up on the Browns. They beat up the Steelers when they had Landry Jones. The Bengals are not a very good team. It's sort of interesting to see where they're at, because I think that they should be the favorite by far in the AFC and maybe in the entire NFL, but definitely not without their faults. Rob, what are you sort of most worried about? And when it comes to this game against the Patriots, what's the thing that worries you the most in that game? And what's the one thing where you're like, if the Seahawks are going to win, I'm going to have the most fun watching them do this?
Well, I saw a lot of the Patriots Steelers game, and I can't say that I was overly impressed with the Patriots. I mean, that game was really close, and for a time it looked like it was swinging the way that I think New England got off to a good start. The game swung the way of the Steelers. The Steelers were well in the game until the end, and then, if memory serves, I think LeGarrette Blount just suddenly started running all over them. They had some nice chunk plays as well. I mean, Gronkowski scored a long touchdown. I think Blount had a couple of big plays. So the Steelers were in the game with Landry Jones, and that was without Le'Veon Bell taking over and having a massive game. I think he had a pretty good game, but yeah, I'm just looking at the box score now. So going into the final quarter, it was 20 points to 13 in favor of the Steelers. So it was a one-score game. So there's if people are sort of looking at this game and thinking, well, the Seahawks haven't got a chance, I mean, that's just not true. The Patriots defense is suddenly without Chandler Jones and Jamie Collins. Now, if you would have said to anybody a year ago, who are the Patriots' best two players on defense, you'd have said Chandler Jones and Jamie Collins. And Bill Belichick has traded them both away in the last 12 months. So they're not there anymore. Hightower, yeah, good player. He's not as good as either of those two. And they don't seem to have many impact players on defense. I like Jabal Sheard. Would have loved to have seen him in Seattle on a cheap deal. He went to New England on a cheap deal. They don't have Darrell Revis. If you remember the Super Bowl, they had Revis at cornerback. They don't have him anymore. I think Patrick Chung is the safety again there. You just look at the defense and you think, well, where are the impact players here? What have they got on the defense? So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, there's an opportunity for the Seahawks. We've just seen them scoring points on a better Bills defense. We've seen them score points against a couple of other good defenses, the Jets. They can move the ball against this Patriots team, in my opinion. The tough test is going to be limiting the plays on defense. Now, we've seen teams, the last 2 weeks anyway, putting up long, sustained drives on the Seahawks, converting third downs. And if Brady gets the opportunity to get into third and short, then they'll probably have a really good chance to win the game. You're right, Kenny, it's about the pressure. If you remember the Super Bowl, between the two teams, Michael Bennett had a heroic day. Cliff Avril was really good that day as well. if you can force Brady to get a little antsy in the pocket, then he will make mistakes. He had 2 picks in that Super Bowl. He threw one to Jeremy Lane in the red zone, and he threw one in New England territory to Bobby Wagner on a crossing route where I think they were looking for Gronkowski, and Wagner just read the play completely and jumped, cut the route, jumped in front of Gronkowski and picked it off. Now, the Seahawks are good enough in coverage that if they can shorten the field and if they can get a bit of pressure on Brady, they can force some turnovers. I mean, I would expect him to have an interception in this game. He's not had one yet this year. I would expect him to have one in this game. It's just whether or not over the course of the game, the Seahawks can put points on a limited New England defense, and whether they can just limit the damage. Can they hold New England to kind of like 23 points maybe to give themselves a chance to win this? But anybody who's kind of expecting that the Seahawks are going to go in there and get blown away, I hope that's not the case. I hope that in a week's time, Kenny, we're not on a podcast saying, hey, we called this wrong. But I just do not see the Seahawks getting blown away in this game. I see a close game where the offenses are winning on both sides of the ball, and it's just about which defense can make enough plays to limit the other. And if it comes down to which defense can be the least bad, I'll give Seattle the edge.
A lot of people are going to be talking about, I don't know if this is my Seattle bias coming through. I guess a lot of people would rather say Dallas, but I would say a lot of people would say that this could be a Super Bowl preview. Obviously, they say that it could be, but will it be? And in my personal opinion, if I had to pick one team right now from the AFC and one team from the NFC, it would definitely be New England and Seattle, because I'm starting with 2 things. I'm starting with head coaches and quarterbacks, and we know that they've got 2 of the best. Not a lot of teams have both of those things, and I mean, I struggle off the top of my head to think of any other team. Maybe Pittsburgh, although they've had their struggles, and I'm not so sure about Mike Tomlin. Other than that, I can't say that Dak Prescott is there yet. I can't say that I really think Mike McCarthy is very good, or that Aaron Rodgers is playing all that especially well. We don't know what kind of a head coach Dan Quinn is yet. He still has to at least make the playoffs one time. Definitely the Saints, you could say, but I feel most comfortable saying that the Seahawks and the Patriots are the most likely teams right now to come out of their respective conferences. What are the odds that you think that this, is a Super Bowl preview? What are the chances that you think that these are the 2 best teams in each conference? And if it's not these 2 teams, who do you think is the second place teams who would be your other team from the AFC and the NFC right now that you think has the best shot to make the Super Bowl? Because it's really hard to say, I think.
Well, it's harder this year than ever, really, to sort of make a prediction on this, because there are I think the Football Outsiders have kind of done a great job. This is why DVOA is so useful, because, in a year when, we're kind of hard to put your finger on why the whole league is what it is and why ratings are down, and they quite rightly point out, well, there's just not a really good balanced team anywhere. I think the Seahawks in their rankings are like 6th on defense, 13th on offense, and about 15th on special teams, which is middle of the road in 2 categories and top 10 but not top 1 in the other. And for the Seahawks to even have that kind of disparity is unusual. So it's an unusual season, and it's going to really, for me, come down to, it doesn't matter what's happened now. I mean, whatever has happened to this point, I think is totally irrelevant. I think it's going to really come down more than ever to which team is hot going into the playoffs. So which team is the one that's got the momentum? Which team is the one that can just find that bit of balance across the board going into the postseason? So it'll be a team, like, if you remember when New York got hot when they won it the first time, they went into the postseason and they really believed that they could do this. They suddenly got this great pass rush. They were throwing the ball really well. I don't think their running game was that good, but they were playing basically fundamental sound football. And I think that's what it's going to be this year. And I'm not quite sure yet which team that could be. I mean, it could easily be the Seahawks that go through the NFC, having rekindled their complete balance across the 3 different disciplines of football. There's a very good chance of that. I could just as easily see the Falcons actually finding that level of success, with the talent that they've got on both sides of the ball. It wouldn't be a total surprise if The Giants, having spent all that money on their defense, if they suddenly got hot, although I don't trust this version of Eli Manning as much as the one that was, 6, 7, 8 years ago. There are other teams. Would it be a total shock if someone like Detroit suddenly put a run together, and if they got into position to do that? It really is wide open. But of the teams in the NFC, I still think I don't trust Dallas to go all the way. I think that they could have a good run, but it's rookie quarterback, his first year. At some point he's got to hit a wall. At some point there's going to be enough tape on Dak Prescott that some defensive coach is going to find something, and other teams are going to use it. And you would expect that he is going to have at least a little bit of an issue. And then there's the whole Tony Romo drama. How does that play into it? I don't know. Maybe Romo comes in then and he leads them on a great run. So it's hard to tell with Dallas, but I think that there's a great chance Seattle could find the balance, a great chance that Atlanta could find that. I don't think New Orleans are good enough on defense to have it. And then in the AFC, I worry about New England's defense in the postseason. I think that they're probably going to coast along in the regular season, have a really good record. But, if they face a team from the AFC North in the playoffs, and that team in the AFC North plays tough defense and runs the ball, are the Patriots going to be able to do it? Are they going to have to totally rely on Tom Brady, probably, to get them there? And as for the other teams, it wouldn't be a shock if Oakland did well, or Kansas City, or Denver. You could see either of those three teams beating New England in the playoffs. You would expect that you could win the AFC North with a 9-7 record, and the team that does win the AFC North, probably with something like a 9-7 record, could easily get to the Super Bowl. If they find that balance, if they get hot at the right time. Mm-hmm. You can imagine that happening. So I think it's a wide open season. I don't think it's necessarily going to be the teams that right now have got the best record, or the teams with the pedigree, or the teams that have done it before that are going to be there. I genuinely believe it will be the team that in week 16 and 17 looks like it's going to have a run and then starts the playoffs hot. And I think that it could be two teams we maybe don't expect to get there. But if anybody's sort of feeling down in the dumps as a Seahawks fan right now, they've got no right to, because the Seahawks are a legitimate contender again, with room to improve in the second half of the year. And it absolutely could be that this week is a preview of the Super Bowl. Could easily be New England against Seattle.
Yeah, we talked before about people, the fan pessimism and looking like and trying to think that maybe a lot of people really believe that the Seahawks will get beat fairly badly this weekend against the New England Patriots, and it's just like, I don't know what you've been watching. I don't know where you've been for the last 5 years. Other fans, the trope or the cliche or the common dig against Seattle Seahawks fans is, oh, congrats, you've just become a football fan, welcome to the the NFL, because bandwagon and all this stuff. And I think for the most part that's a bunch of BS, because of course any team that wins the Super Bowl or starts going to playoffs every year is going to pick up more fans. That's the point. That's what happens in sports. But the fans, I think it's a different thing. The fans only make it worse for themselves when they talk about things as if they have completely forgotten what happened last week. But I think that's common of any team, and it's common of sports fans. What have you done for me right now? But I think, look, if a team hasn't lost by more than 10 points in 5 years, eventually it's going to happen. This is a game where it's certainly set up to happen. But if you think that, if you're a fan, you think that the Seahawks, who, have a great quarterback, a great tight end, a great wide receiver, a great defense, are just going to go in and not be prepared for this game, it's just asinine. And I think if you start to look at the numbers, and like we've been talking about, the Patriots defense and their problems in the pass defense, and their issues protecting Tom Brady, and what the Seahawks have on defense, you would start to realize that the New England Patriots, it's probably going to be another like their game in 2012, a 24-23 type score, like the Super Bowl, 28-24. I just don't see either one of these teams pulling ahead by maybe more than 10 points at any point in the game. So there's definitely, I think there's plenty of cause for concern. If you don't want to pick up an L, there's probably going to be an L. There's probably going to be there's definitely going to be an L for one team, and it's probably 55% chance that it's going to be the Patriots winning the game. But I would still say, look, they're going on prime time. This is they've got the whole day there to sort of toss this out, and they're very well prepared. And I think the Patriots do have the advantage of 14 days rest or whatever versus the Seahawks getting 6 days rest. The NFL did not do Seattle any favor with that schedule, but this is probably, the Seahawks are probably one of the top 3 teams in the NFL. And if you can't see that because they're not good at running the ball anymore, I just don't think that you're watching the games with a objective, fair point of view. You're looking at it from the point of view that they should be flawless on every play. And you liked what you saw on them on offense this week. You didn't like what you saw from them on defense. Before, you did not like what you saw from them on offense, and you liked what you saw from them on defense. And you should realize that most teams, and most fans don't like what they see on either side of the ball. They rarely get the opportunity to go week to week to go, oh, we have a really good offense. Oh, no, we have a really good defense. Well, guess what? At some point, these teams, every single year, the two sides come together and play well at the same time. And if there's a team that has a shot to win the Super Bowl, I'd say the Seahawks are number 2 in that order behind the Patriots. They are absolutely going to win the West. They have a 2-game lead in the division. The Cardinals don't look like any sort of a playoff team. There's nobody in the NFC that looks especially scary, including the Dallas Cowboys. And there's a good chance that the Seahawks will get a home game and will be riding into the division playoffs. As long as, and even if they pick up a loss this weekend, it's going to be in an AFC team on the road. It's not going to be a home game. It's not going to be a conference game. It's probably, even though it's the biggest game of the year from a standpoint of people watching and the one that you circle on your calendar, and it's a matchup that, is probably the best and most exciting and interesting matchup of the year. In another way, it's arguably the least important game of the year because as far as the schedule goes, it's going to count the least. It really is. And it's the one that you probably already expected to lose. So you would want to win the games that you expect to win, and you'd want to win half the games that you expect to lose. And that's a good team. So if you expect to lose it and you lose it, it's not that big of a deal. But I definitely don't think that they're going to lose this game by more than a touchdown. It'll probably come down to a final play, as all of their games pretty much have been this season. And whenever I talk for 15 minutes straight, Rob, I give you the floor before moving on to the next topic. I have a next topic, but I give you the floor.
No, I think you made some very good points there, Kenny. And I think that it's also, if there was one thing I could say, and I don't want to sort of get on a soapbox about this or anything, but the Seahawks are going through a golden age. They're going through a period of successful winning football that in about 10 or 15 years' time, whatever the next era of Seahawks football is, it will be almost impossible to match what they have now, which is a team that is led by a really, really popular coach with big character players who, have got this fantastic connection with the fans, a likable quarterback in his prime, who is also an exceptional playmaker, a tough as nails defense, everything that you would want. If you were to sort of list things that you would want in your football team, the Seahawks have got everything. They've got them all. They've won a Super Bowl. They came within a play of winning another. If they'd have won that second Super Bowl, their legacy probably would have been confirmed forever. Now they're probably going to have to win another one or another two to kind of banish the memory of that, but it is what it is. But it may never get better than this as a Seahawks football fan. So while ever we can sit here and stress about close games or stress that the Seahawks aren't blowing teams out 38-10 every week, or, this part of the team's not working, or this guy's had a rough patch, just try and enjoy it, because it isn't going to be like this forever. And the next era of Seahawks football might be more like the Jim Mora year than the Pete Carroll years. So let's just enjoy this while we can. Let's enjoy watching a winning team. It could be a lot worse. You could be a fan of the Titans or the Jags or the Browns or whatever, or all those other teams that are never any good. The Seahawks have been great for several years. They're going to be great for a few more. just enjoy it.
Yeah.
Just relax.
I mean, yeah, when you say it couldn't, when you say it could be worse, I mean, we're literally talking about 28 other teams, maybe 29 to be a fan of. This is one of the best. So, yeah, certainly enjoy it. One of those teams that I wouldn't want to be rooting for is the LA Rams. And that's sort of what I want to talk about in this next segment for a bit. And that is because of Jared Goff. Chris Carter on Jared Goff, quote, "The guys know he can't play. They messed the pick up." I wrote about it too this week and said, look, I'm condemning Jared Goff as a bust right now simply for the fact that he can't get on the field for a team that should be in the playoff race that isn't because of their quarterback. Case Keenum is a bottom 3 starting quarterback. He's awful. The team has been in games that he's lost for them, and they have the number 1 overall pick that they traded 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and 2 thirds to go get. And I don't care if you are saying, well, you got to get ready for the playbook, or, we blah, blah, blah. Screw it. You can't do any worse at quarterback. If you're saying that that if he's better for the team, then he should be playing. If he's worse for the team, then he is awful. And if he's not playing, I have to assume that he's either awful or, I just have to assume that he's awful, or that the coaching staff is that dumb, or that the GM just is like, I don't know, because I think we already knew that the Rams didn't run a good ship, but at this point, to give up that much capital for a guy that couldn't play in year 1, regardless of whether or not the reason is, like, Dak Prescott is one of, a top 12 quarterback right now. Carson Wentz is right there with him. Cody Kessler is holding his own for the Cleveland Browns. He's holding his own. Everybody, it seems like, can go out there. We've had a number of guys go out there. If you go back the last 8 years, we've had a lot of quarterbacks go out as rookies and play well, or the ones that, that they put out there. We haven't seen it stunt people's growth. We haven't seen anything along those lines. There's no reason that Jared Goff should not be on the field. And if he's not on the field, we already know that he wasn't good enough to be picked number 1 overall. Carson Wentz went right behind him, and he started from week 1. And the Eagles, they got off to a better start than they're at right now. But I would say that he's, put them in a better position. So to me, it's like already Jared Goff is hitting Jamarcus Russell levels. And I have serious doubts that he will ever be a significant starting quarterback in the league. Sort of reminds me of a Matt Leinart situation, though he's 10th overall, that he couldn't get on the field. I mean, they had sort of other things going on there with Kurt Warner and everything, but it just doesn't even seem like the team wants him out there. It seems like all the comments about Jared Goff are negative. It doesn't seem like Jeff Fisher likes a damn thing that he sees in practice. And I don't know what the problem is. I know that on this podcast, you said that he wasn't a very good prospect, that he was being overrated, that the talk of him going number 1 overall was insane. So do you feel justified in thinking that Jared Goff was nowhere near being worthy of the number 1 overall pick? Or do you think that we should at least justifiably give them enough time to put him out there?
Well, I think we have to see him before we can properly judge him to be a total bust. Because if he actually, if he benefits from sitting the year, learning the playbook, and then comes out next year and leads the Rams to, like an 11-win season, then obviously this will look like a very smart move. But I think it's such an interesting discussion because just to go back a year and sort of what were we talking about with Jared Goff a year ago on this podcast? Well, I was saying that I thought he was a sort of early 2nd round pick. I compared him to Brock Osweiler based on his play. Osweiler's play at Arizona State and Goff's play at California. They were both very similar in stature, in physical, appearance, in their ability to throw incredibly pretty passes. I mean, I remember Goff throwing a pass up against Washington last year, which was beautiful, in between 2 defenders for a touchdown. Really, really good pass. Osweiler would regularly make these beautiful passes at Arizona State where he's kind of like just got the ball into the tightest window and it's perfectly on time. And you'd say, wow, what a pass. But then they'd also have moments where they would have like incredible meltdowns and throw multiple interceptions. So we saw Osweiler have a terrible game against Boise State in a bowl game. We saw Jared Goff throw 5 interceptions against Utah last year. And you just see those performances and you just think, wow, that was really bad. What are people seeing in this guy to believe that he could be the first overall pick? I can remember, you know, I don't like calling other people out, but there's a guy called Dane Brugler, I think it is, who works for CBS Sports, and I remember having a brief, terse conversation with him on Twitter where someone had highlighted this play by Goff where he'd thrown some pass to a receiver, and these two guys, one of them was Brugler, and he was saying, "Wow, you know, look at this. This is amazing. This is why Jared Goff's really good." And I kind of just tweeted and said, "Well, what are you seeing here? You know, what about this pass is like?" Because to me, when I was looking at it, he had all the time in the world in the pocket. There was no pressure, so he had time to see the receiver. The receiver actually created separation from the defensive back. It was a safety in coverage on a receiver. So the receiver's got the edge there because it's not a quarterback, it's a safety. The receiver's got about 2 yards of separation, and Goff threw the ball behind the receiver, which meant that he had to contest the pass with the safety, as opposed to if he'd thrown it 2 yards in front of him, he would have been sprinting away for a touchdown. Instead, it was just a completion. And you know, I ended up just thinking, what are people? That's not a good pass. That's a bad pass. That was a touchdown that he's thrown an inaccurate pass on and made the receiver work instead of just scoring an easy touchdown. Now, that's not first overall material at all. And the fact that he's not playing, I thought that Hard Knocks was embarrassing, quite frankly. I mean, I watched every episode of that. And Goff just looked like a lost little boy. I mean, you know, you hear all the stories of Russell Wilson coming in as a third-round rookie behind Jackson and Matt Flynn, and you know, Wilson just going in there and acting like he was the starter immediately, acting like he was a seasoned vet, and probably pissing off a lot of the veterans on the roster already because, you know, who is this guy? Who does he think he is? Stuff like that. You know, there's a lot of stories like that going around. But Wilson owned the situation, sort of didn't care what anybody thought, was like, so had such a one-track mind that he was going to go in there and win that job. And there was none of that from Goff. Goff kind of was in there, and he almost gave the impression of an entitled first overall pick. I remember there was one clip of him in Hard Knocks, sat on a lazy boy chair or some leather chair, talking to the tight end, another rookie, Tyler Higbee, and they were both watching some college football on a big flat screen TV. And I'm thinking, you know, look at this guy. He's in a mansion. He's never played a snap in the NFL. He's very comfortable. He doesn't look like he's under any pressure whatsoever. He's from California, and he's just been taken by the Los Angeles Rams. So he's not even had to move house. He does not look like a guy who has got anything at stake here, that there is anything for this guy to fight for. And it almost seems like him being told, we're not going to start you straight away, as almost how he's translated that is to, well, I don't need to push myself, and I'm not going to try and win this job. And you watch Case Keenum on Hard Knocks, and he's like, this is my job, and this is my team, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And he's got an arrogance and a swagger to him. And he was not going to be beaten in that battle. And Jared Goff almost just conceded and didn't want to fight for the first to start the first game. And I'm just looking at this situation now, and I'm thinking it's made all the worse by the fact that Los Angeles didn't just take him first overall, but as you mentioned, Kenny, have given up their first round pick next year, multiple picks to go up and get him. This isn't just taking a guy first overall. You can live with that.
Let's not forget that their pick right now is 6th overall.
Yeah. So they're giving up potentially 2 top 10 picks for this guy. 6th overall, by the way, in what is looking like a really, really good draft at the top of the draft in 2017. So they're giving up a lot for this guy. And, you know, as you were talking, Kenny, this thought popped into my head that where would the Rams be without Aaron Donald? You know, if you took Aaron Donald out of that team, what are they? You know, what do they do? You watch the Rams every week. Aaron Donald makes a play every single week. He has like a couple of sacks or something like that. The guy's incredible. He without a shadow of a doubt, he was a fantastic pick. The Detroit Lions should have taken him and put him next to Ndamukong Suh, and they should not have taken Eric Ebron. They should have took Aaron Donald. They didn't. The Rams have. Congratulations. The Rams have got a start. But apart from that, look what they've had. Look what they've had in draft stock since the RG3 trade. They've had more first-round picks than anybody else. What have they got for it? Absolutely nothing. And what's more, they're taking talented players. Tavon Austin was talent, great athlete. Greg Robinson was a great athlete, 2nd overall pick. You know, Alec Ogletree, great athlete. You know, they've taken really, really good football players with massive potential. They don't know how to develop a player at all. They've not developed anybody. How many late round picks have the Rams developed? Where's their depth on their roster? What are they doing? You know, they've wasted picks on. They've not been able to find a receiver. You know, they're getting nothing out of Todd Gurley. They're not developing talent there. And if it wasn't for Aaron Donald, where would they be? I mean, like, if there is almost no argument now to stick behind Les Snead and Jeff Fisher. There's none at all. And it is, quite frankly, great news for the NFC West that the Rams are just continuing with this arrangement and this front office, because it's so poor. They're not developing Goff. They're not developing anybody. And it's only for the Aaron Donald's unique talent that they seem to have any real success.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Seahawks and the Cardinals are just mopping up with the fact that San Francisco and LA have decided to stick with their GMs despite zero results. I mean, as you said, the LA Rams have taken 43 players since 2012 with Les Snead and Jeff Fisher. Aaron Donald is a Pro Bowler. Todd Gurley was a Pro Bowler last year. You know, I think you can make the argument, as I think Pro Football Focus has. They named him the best player in the NFL last year, and I think he's on pace to be the NFL. They've already said, like, midway point, he's still the best player in the NFL, but they're wasting that. And, you know, the player that he was taken in 2014. They took Greg Robinson second overall that year. So Greg Robinson was their premier pick in 2014. You know, they highlighted LaMarcus Joyner a lot on Hard Knocks. I don't know how he's played so far, but I feel like I saw him put some bad plays together this week when I watched the Rams game. Late round picks, definitely not, you know, getting anything out of it. And, you know, the receivers that they've tried to develop, like Brian Quick and Chris Gibbons and Tavon Austin, and it's just nothing. Farrell Cooper, there's just nothing going on with the Rams, and it doesn't really seem like, you know, as long as they're going to stick with that plan of Snead and Fisher, it seems like everyone else is going to maybe not pick up wins, because the Rams are certainly building themselves to beat the Seahawks and win 4 or 5 games in the NFC West, but never be a threat to win the division, because they aren't apparently built to beat anybody else. But I think that there's just something wrong with any quarterback that's not capable of playing in the NFL when you're supposed to. You know, there's just something wrong about it. When we've seen Derek Carr go out there and take his licks, you know, Derek Carr did not have a good season at all as a rookie. He came from a spread offense, same as Jared Goff. The Raiders put him out there. He sucked. But now he's one of the best quarterbacks, you know, in the AFC, maybe in the NFL, you know, that he's at least producing, and there's something going on there. Maybe, you know, Jared Goff doesn't have a Amari Cooper to throw to, but you can't just wait, you know, and hope that they will appear, especially when you're so bad at developing. So it's not like you can say, like, well, we want to wait until the offensive line is better next year. Haven't you wanted the offensive line to be better every single year for the last 15 years? It's not going to happen. So you might as well find out what kind of a player he is, because everybody else with a young quarterback they like is pretty much doing that, with the exception of like the Jets and like the Broncos. But there's nothing holding him back other than apparently, I think, himself. So it's pretty interesting to watch. And I don't know, like, it's dumbfounding. And I'm just going to say, like, you know, if he was in the draft this year, where would he be going? And, you know, I think if he was the same status, you know, where would you rank Jared Goff in the quarterbacks of this draft if he was in it?
Well, it's looking like a really bad draft for quarterbacks. I mean, I do have to say that the more I watch of Mitch Trubisky at North Carolina, you know, he really looks good, you know, and there's always a fear with a 1-year wonder, but I do like the look of him. I would not put Goff ahead of him. As far as I'm concerned, how I view Goff as a kind of early second round pick is whether it was last year or this year, that's the range I would put him in. I mean, that might make him the second or third quarterback off the board this year, but, you know, in a better year, there might be 4 guys ahead of him. I think that right now I'd probably put him behind Deshaun Watson. I would put him behind Mitch Trubisky, and I would put him behind Deshaun Kaiser if he declared. I don't think he's going to. I think that he'd be better served staying another year at Notre Dame. But he could be the fourth best quarterback if he was in this class. He might end up being sort of the first or second, depending on who actually declares.
All right, that's a good chance to switch over to college football real quick and talk about some of the games that happened this weekend, and obviously leading into the draft prospects for 2017. I watched the Alabama LSU game, as a lot of people did, and it was interesting too that they said like that in another game that those two teams had played that was the another low scoring game. I forget which year it was, 2013 or maybe the 9-6 game. They had said 44 or some players in that game had gone on to the NFL, which is just freaking insane. That you could have a game where there's that high of a concentration of NFL talent. And I don't think that it's any different right now. A concentration of NFL talent for sure on both of these teams, especially Alabama. A lot of guys that you're projecting for the first round, a lot of guys for the top 10, a lot of guys overall for the draft. As Alabama won that game. And I thought, with it, the way that it was going, I really thought LSU had played better in the first half. And, while no team was really putting themselves in position to score, I really think that when the tide started to turn, no pun intended, for Alabama, I think there was like a penalty on them hitting a guy out of bounds that I thought was completely unfair, and that extended a drive, and then they went on down and scored on that. And I think that the LSU got screwed a little bit in that game, and I think it won't really highlight how close they were to winning, even though Alabama completely shut down Leonard Fournette, with as they have in the last two games previous to that. And I'm just sort of curious too, like your thoughts on the game of all these defensive players, and something that you wrote about, what sort of problem do you think that this game highlights for college football and football in general?
Yeah, I thought it was a fascinating game. If you like sort of that old school defensive football, but the problem that it really highlighted was the offensive lines. I mean, neither offensive line played well. They were smothered. They were destroyed. It kind of highlights the issue that the NFL teams are facing right now. Is that if you were an NFL scout at that game, and you wanted to go and see how the offensive linemen held up against pro talent playing defense, you'd be thinking, oh my God, there's nothing to work with here. I mean, I don't think Cam Robinson played particularly well. I'm not a big fan of his anyway. But LSU handled Alabama pretty well. They came up with a nice little scheme thing where they were going to put the cornerback on the edge and have him rush pretty much every snap to prevent Hurts, the freshman quarterback of Alabama, scrambling and getting out and breaking contain. They did it very well. I thought Tre'Davious White was fantastic for LSU in doing that kind of a job, but he was also fantastic in coverage. I mean, Tre'Davious White was sensational at the weekend. I don't know why more people aren't as high on him as me. I think he's just such a good player. The Alabama front seven is just ridiculous. I mean, like Tim Williams, again, talking to players who are underrated, how the hell is Tim Williams not in everybody's top five? I mean, he's just incredible. And the great thing about him in this game is that he was handling the run as well as he was the pass. So, he's a great speed rusher. We know that. People have kind of labeled him just a one-trick pony, one-dimensional speed rusher. But here he was handling the edge, working against the run, showing great power and physicality. Tim Williams is everything that you would want in an edge rusher for the NFL. So he, for me, is just a slight notch below Myles Garrett, who could be the number one overall pick. Jonathan Allen was superb. Ryan Anderson, who I've written about today, just makes plays every single week. Reuben Foster was excellent as well. But the offensive line for LSU was so overmatched. And one of the things they were doing was, even when they were blocking 1v1 and sort of handling that, the linebackers were getting free. So Reuben Foster, so many times I think Reuben Foster had something like 15 tackles in this game. All he was doing was he was having a free run to the running back every single time. There was absolutely no chance for Leonard Fournette. Every time Leonard Fournette got the ball, he'd look up and there was somebody in his grill. I mean, there was like somebody right there immediately, and he'd try and bounce it outside, and there'd be people on the edge as well. I mean, there was no chance for Fournette in this game, and the offensive line wasn't getting any push. There was no pass protection. The quarterback for LSU got hit about 20 times. Hurts was pressured an awful lot as well. And it just goes to show how many issues there are in college football with offensive linemen. All of the best athletes are playing defense. It was none more so evident at the weekend. Got to point out Jamal Adams as well, who had a great game at safety for LSU. But the defense is just miles better. And it's a problem. And teams in the NFL need offensive lines to improve at college. They need to see these big-time athletes playing offensive line. I mean, thankfully, there are one or two options that have become apparent recently. I think Garrett Bowles at Utah, I've written a lot about him in the last 10 days. Garrett Bowles is a fantastic player, incredible player. And if he's there in the first round for the Seahawks, run to the podium. He is sensational.
Well, let's talk about, let me set that up real quick, because as you talked about LSU and Alabama and the amount of players in this game and the horrible offensive lines, in your latest mock draft, you've got 8 of the top 14 picks out of the top 14 picks, coming out of LSU or Alabama. You've got LSU Fournette at number 1, Alabama number 4, Alabama number 5, Alabama number 7, LSU number 8, Alabama number 10, Alabama number 12, and LSU Tre'Davious White at number 14. So a lot of elite players, coming just out of there that'll be in this next coming draft. But as far as offensive line goes, your first offensive lineman off the board in your mock draft is, as you said, Garrett Bowles, 26 to Seahawks. And I'm curious, with the amount that, you sort of really like Garrett Bowles out of Utah and the fact that there aren't any tackles ahead of him in this draft, is it, at this point, do you think that the idea of the Seahawks taking the best tackle on the board is wishful thinking and it's something to get the conversation started, and as the process continues into the draft, that there's no chance that Bowles will be available past the top 20, or do you think that pretty much is where he'll slot?
It's a great question. I'm really glad that we're going to get to talk about this, because it's not something I've really talked about on the blog. But I think there's every chance that Bowles will go off the board before the Seahawks pick. I think there's every chance that he could be a top 20 pick. But there's a couple of reasons why he might not be. First of all, he will be 25 next year, so he's a little older. He's a bit like Bruce Irvin. Bruce Irvin obviously had a troubled background. Garrett Bowles had a troubled background. They both went to the JUCO college ranks and then joined college teams. It was West Virginia for Bruce Irvin. It's Utah for Bowles, and they're coming into the NFL at a later age. So teams generally don't. I mean, we saw Margus Hunt come into the league at 26. I think he went in the late second round. The players that are kind of that age, teams are a little bit wary of, because you might only be getting them for 4 years before they start to wear down. Teams, I don't think the Seahawks are bothered about this, but I think teams view these first-round picks almost as like guys they want for 10 years, that they want these guys to be major parts. Whereas I think the Seahawks think, we want this guy for the first contract, and then we'll make a decision on where they're at after the first contract. They're kind of shortening this. They're looking at these first-round picks as like a 4-year investment initially, and then see where you go from there. So I don't think it will concern the Seahawks as much as some other teams. I think that the backstory might bother some people. I mean, he was kicked out of school. His dad kicked him out of the house. He was arrested for vandalism. He has turned his life around completely. And, this might work against the Seahawks drafting him as well, because teams like these guys who faced adversity and then turn their lives around. I mean, he's married. He's going to have his first child soon. He is an upstanding citizen. He is incredibly respected at Utah. The way he carries himself on the field, Kenny, is just he's just a fantastic guy. They can see the respect. I remember watching some of the UCLA game, and after the game, all of the UCLA players just gravitating toward Garrett Bowles and saying, "Man, you're really good." Some of the blocks he had in that game were incredible as well. I mean, if anybody wants to see what Garrett Bowles is all about, go and watch the UCLA Utah game. It's just incredible, some of the stuff he does. His second level blocking it's some of the best I think I've ever seen, and the combination of like his hand use, gets his hands under the pad level, gets it under the inside shoulder, his ability to then lock on and twist a player, that is so hard to do. His hips are so loose, for a guy to be sort of 6'5", 300 pounds, and to have that initial contact, that burst, and that power, to get into a guy and then have the athleticism to turn them, drive them off the play, to have the footwork to mirror and then contain as well in pass pro, but also have that driving ability in the run game to be able to pull from left tackle and then connect with a safety on the second level. It's really difficult to do. And like you can see so many examples of like, you see players that are great athletes off the edge, but don't have the power. You see people like Jack Conklin, who are kind of like quite good athletically, but more power guys. And they're going very early. And then you look at Garrett Bowles and he's got the complete package. You know, he's got everything that you would want in a left tackle prospect. And I just think that the age thing is why I'm willing to sort of entertain the idea of him going to the Seahawks. Plus the fact that I always kind of like wonder, I love the guy. Nobody else has him in the first round, Kenny. You know, maybe he's somebody who in 3 months' time, everybody's going to have in the top 10. Who knows? But right now, nobody else has him in there. So I'm willing to sort of put him with the Seahawks for now and keep him there. He can be our guy for now. I just love everything about him.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And do you think you've been clued in at all to what you've seen on the field or heard from coaches or anything along those lines? Do you think you've been clued in at all to Germain Ifedi's place on the team next season?
Well, I think that Jermaine, I was actually going to mention Jermain Ifedi as a reason why he might last to the Seahawks because, you know, Jermain Ifedi was, there aren't many human beings like Jermain Ifedi. There are not people of his size and his athleticism and his edge and his potential and his intelligence, no character flags, nothing. And he somehow lasted to the 32nd overall pick. So, you know, if people can allow Ifedi to fall, then maybe Garrett Bowles will fall as well. In terms of what Ifedi's future is, I'd be quite happy with him just to keep him where he is and let him learn that one position. I think that moving things around every year is not good for an offensive line. I think that it's kind of, I like the idea of having a guy who is enormous with massive physical potential playing right guard. I just love the idea of that because I think that, you know, Kalichi Osemele didn't walk into the league and suddenly become the best left guard in the NFL. It took him a couple of years. So I'm hopeful that that's going to be the way that Ifedi goes. I'd like to see him stay at right guard. I think that Bowles could come in and play left. If they drafted him, for example, they could put him at left or right tackle. Either would be fine. You know, that might be a decision they make depending on how George Fant develops. If they see starter potential in him, it also might depend on what they see for Reese Odiambo. You know, do they see Odiambo as somebody who is a guard, and do they put him at left guard and move Glowinski to right guard and put Ifedi at tackle, or do they try Odiambo at left tackle and then Bowles at right tackle, or the other way around? You know, they've got some options there. So I'm really, I can't say that I've seen a player that I'm as excited about who isn't going to be a top 10 pick and out of Seattle's reach completely. I haven't seen a player yet this year that excites me as much as Garrett Bowles. He is, if I would encourage all Seahawks fans who are interested in the draft and listen to this podcast to go and check out Utah's Garrett Bowles.
Interesting stuff indeed. I think we talked about the running back there at Utah too, and the huge numbers that he's put up since returning from retirement. So definitely some interesting stuff there. With regards to exciting players watched, it's a good time to transition over to something else that Seattle football fans would be interested in, which is the University of Washington Huskies. They improved to 9-0 with a blowout win over Cal, put up 66 points. And it's interesting to see, you know, where Jake Browning stands right now in the Heisman race. Sort of, you know, I wouldn't say that it was totally out of left field, but definitely unexpected that, you know, if Lamar Jackson has any sort of slip up between now and the end of the year, Browning very well probably will be the Heisman if he continues what he's been doing, which is 34 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. As I said, 9-0 record. His efficiency, passer rating, however they calculate that, is 202.8, which would beat Russell Wilson's NCAA record set there in Wisconsin in 2011. And he's still got plenty of room left to go. I mean, they've got a game this weekend. They play another, I think I'm going to say they have 3 more games, including the Apple Cup, and then obviously there could be a Pac-12 championship, and then obviously there could be a cup. There could even be 2 more games if he gets into the FCS championship. So it's really interesting to see, could he put up, you know, 50 touchdowns and how many, you know, interceptions and everything like that. You watched the game against Cal. What are your thoughts on Washington? You know, because I think they're there was question as far as their schedule goes. Their out of conference schedule was a joke, with Rutgers, Idaho, and Portland State. I can't say that Washington State's was much better, and they lost to Eastern Washington and they lost to Boise State. But I think that it's definitely interesting to see that these are the last two teams undefeated in the Pac-12. And, if Washington State can win their next two games, which is this weekend at home versus Cal, and then their toughest test so far, maybe they'll be going to Colorado, who at that time could be ranked in the top 13 or so. They went down when Stanford was ranked 15th and blew them out. So it'll be really interesting to watch, and I'll be at that game myself, Rob. I hope you're able to tune in through a television of some sort. So that could be a really great game, perhaps the greatest Apple Cup of all time. And all of this babbling, I guess, eventually ends into a question of, what are the odds that you think Jake Browning is the number one overall pick in 2018?
Well, I think it's worth considering because I think when you watch him play, you do see a lot of things that NFL teams will like, and no one's going to mistake him. He hasn't got the arm talent of like Matt Stafford coming out or somebody like that. He hasn't got the all round physical brilliance of an Andrew Luck. You're not talking about a player like that, but you're looking at a player that is incredibly accurate, just has a complete control of that team. When he's out on the field, he is not flustered at all. There has been at no time has he looked, even as a freshman, really, as he looked under pressure. He's ice in his veins. He looks like he was made for the big stage. His deep ball has looked really good this year. It helps when you've got John Ross, but it certainly, his deep balls look good. His short and medium range accuracy looks good. He's just mobile enough to extend plays if he needs to, or to scramble for a short first down if he needs to as well. I mean, there's just so much to like, and the numbers he's putting up as well. He's lighting up teams. I just think he's a really, really interesting prospect. Now, there's always this kind of thing when a player isn't kind of absolutely fantastic physically, with a major upside. If they ever have a dip in their college career, then they get hammered. Players like this, if next year before the draft he actually regresses and takes a step back, then his stock will go completely down the toilet, because that's the way it works. He would need to have sort of incredible physical talent to maintain that with a regression. But if he continues on this trajectory, then, and especially with a dearth, quite frankly, of good quarterbacks coming through the league, and with a demand as high as ever for good young quarterbacks, there is a chance that he could go early. A quick point on Washington. I don't know. People will know, listening to the podcast, I do not have an allegiance to any team. So please don't accuse me of anything for what I'm just about to say. But I am a little bit concerned about Washington. And the reason is that throughout all of the Chris Peterson, Boise State years, they always seemed like they get to a point at this stage of the year where they would be pretty much unbeatable. Like, who's going to beat Boise State? And nationally, there'd be a debate on, like, should they be in the national championship? Are they one of the two best teams? Now you only have to be in the top four because the playoffs. But people would be talking about them. Can they go undefeated? And you'd look at the schedule and you'd say, well, who's going to beat them? And then there'd be a team like Nevada, for example, when Colin Kaepernick was there, who would beat Boise State. There'd always be one team that would beat them in the last sort of 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And it would kind of eliminate the debate then. There wouldn't be should they be in the top two? Should they be in the national championship? That would all go, because they'd lose that game. And I'm worried that that's going to happen again for the Huskies. I'm not a Huskies fan, but I'm worried they're going to come up in a game where they should win and they won't. And maybe that's this week against USC, who are suddenly looking pretty good. I think if they get past this one, I expect them to beat Arizona State. I'm going to be at the Washington-Arizona State game. I'm very much looking forward to see that. I want them to be undefeated when I go there, because I want to see that unfold. I want them to get to the Apple Cup unbeaten. I want the Apple Cup to be great. But I am just a little bit concerned, Kenny, based on what we saw with Boise State and Chris Peterson. I know the two teams are linked, but it always used to be this way with Chris at Boise, that there would be a team that beats them unexpectedly, and I wonder whether that could happen again.
It would be really interesting. It'll be really interesting to see what happens in the Pac-12 over the next 3 weeks. And as a Cougs fan, because I can say I'm a Cougs fan, and I can also say that I want Washington to come into that fucking apple. Excuse my language. I want them to come into that Apple Cup with all of the wins. I want them to be ranked number 1 when they get beaten by Washington State. But it is interesting to see what's set up for Washington State too. Because they're now in a position where they're 7-2. And if they won this weekend against Cal, they'd be 8-2, and if they won next week at Colorado, a top 15 team, they'd be 9-2 with a top 25 win. If they beat Washington, they'd be 10-2 with a win over a top 5, top 4-3 team. And if then they would go to the Pac-12 championship. And if they beat, in that scenario, I guess it's interesting because then Colorado would have 2 losses, USC would have 3 losses, Utah would maybe be the team going. I would guess Utah might be the team going to that game. So then they'd have a win over Utah if they won that game, and 11-2. And could Washington State rebound from losing to an FCS team in week 1, Eastern Washington, to going to the Rose Bowl with a top 10 ranking? I think that they had said this weekend in the game when I was watching it that Washington State was like the first team to lose to an FCS team in week 1 when they weren't ranked, and then it become ranked later in the year. And they've done that for each of the last 2 years. It's really weird. But I'm curious what your thought is too on this dynamic of college football. I don't think we've ever really discussed it, and it's an interesting topic, which when people talk about Washington's strength of schedule, they can say stuff like, well, they beat Utah and Utah's ranked, right? Let's just look at their schedules now, not where they were at the time of the game. When they beat Utah, and Utah is ranked 15th. So that's a good win for Washington because Utah had a good record and they're ranked 15th. And Utah's only loss is to Cal, but Cal's not great. So they lost to Cal, but they didn't lose any of their games and they're ranked 15th. And they lost to Washington, and Washington's ranked 4th. So we're not going to dock Utah anything, because I think Utah may have moved up after that game. We're not going to dock Utah because Washington's ranked, and we're not going to, and we're going to give Washington credit because Utah is ranked. But it's like, at some point, do we just kind of say, look, there are way too many, not that there should be a change, but there are so many college teams that they can play these schedules where they're not playing great teams. They're in a conference where there aren't very many great teams, and then we base so much on their wins against ranked teams without considering the fact that this ranking could be based off of the fact that they lost to other teams that are ranked that might not be deserved to be ranked. If that isn't confusing enough coming out of my mouth, consider how confusing it is in my head. But Utah, it seems like a lot of times teams get credits, wins or losses, based on if their opponent is ranked, and if the teams are constantly being ranked for these reasons, and if there's so much consideration for wins over quote unquote ranked teams, that that it's kind of making teams look much better than they are. And we can sit here and say, well, what if the Cougs get a win over Colorado while they're ranked 14th? Or what if Colorado gets a win over Washington State when they're ranked 24th or 23rd or whatever? And it's like, well, maybe we shouldn't give a shit what they're ranked, because we're giving too much credit to the fact that they're getting credit for teams being ranked. Does that make sense? Do you think that there is sort of a misnomer, or it can get confused to give teams for credit for wins based on teams being ranked when they might just not be playing anybody good?
Well, I'm pretty confused by the whole way that they come up with these rankings. I mean, I think you make a fair point. I mean, like when Washington beat Stanford, they were the 7th ranked team. I mean, nobody would even dream of Stanford aren't even ranked now. So, that win at the time looked amazing, but now with hindsight, it's pretty run of the mill. If Washington were playing Stanford this weekend, for example, everybody would have expected them to win at a canter. But at the time, I remember that game was huge. It was a huge game for Washington when they blew them away. I didn't understand Texas A&M being in the top 4 last week. It seemed to me like they were trying too hard to make a headline about the top 4 and get some publicity by leaving Washington out than they were actually making a serious go at this. And that was proven with Texas A&M's loss to Mississippi State. But then they only dropped Texas A&M to number 8 this week. I think if they wanted to make a statement, they should have put Louisville in the top 4. But then now Louisville's number 6. and behind Ohio State, who lost to Penn State. Louisville lost to Clemson, who were number 2. That's Louisville's only loss was a close loss on the road against number 2 Clemson. So why are they number 6? You could make a case for Louisville being at number 4. I mean, they've got the Heisman Trophy winner elect as their quarterback. They've got a decent defense. They've absolutely shellacked Florida State, who are ranked somewhere in the early 20s or the teens. They only just lost to Clemson and probably should have won that game on the road. And Clemson's number 2. And they're behind Ohio State, who lost to Penn State, who I think 10th, and a bit of a fluky 10th as well. I would not expect Penn State to be 10th by the end of the year. So how is Ohio State ahead of Louisville right now? It just doesn't seem to make much sense to me. I also don't really understand why Michigan are so clearly ahead of Washington, because who have Michigan beaten? They squeaked past Wisconsin in a bit of a boring game, which finished 14-7. They've not really played anybody else apart from that. They're kind of just blowing out bad teams every week. I kind of feel like Michigan have almost got a reputation based on the fact that they have Harbaugh as their coach, as opposed to anything they're actually doing on the field. So I'm not impressed by 55-0 wins against Maryland and stuff like that. That just doesn't. I don't get it. So I don't really understand the whole process. I think that there could be a more refined process. I don't think we need as many people making the decisions on the playoff picture that are actually doing it.
Who do you think are the 4 most dangerous teams in college football? If it was your choice, regardless of record, who do you think are the 4 teams that could really, make some noise and have the most talent?
Alabama is a clear number 1. I think that I would probably put. I would seriously consider putting Washington at number 2, because I just think that at the moment they've got everything. They've got a good quarterback who's a Heisman contender. They've got 2 good running backs. They've got weapons at receiver, especially with John Ross, who is fantastic. They've got a defense which has got talent on each level. Defensive linemen who are going to end up in the NFL. They've got linebackers who are going to be in the NFL. They've got edge rushers. They've got secondary players in Sidney Jones, who could be a first rounder, but a Baker could be a first rounder. So, if Alabama played Washington, I would expect Alabama to win the game, probably by 10, 15 points, if not more. They're number 1. But I think Washington overall has got the most balance and talent overall. So I would potentially put them at number 2. I think it'd be a toss-up then between Clemson and Louisville. I think that they would be potentially 3 and 4. And then I need to see Michigan. The last time Michigan played anybody who was any good, they got absolutely destroyed by Ohio State at the end of last year.
Mm-hmm.
I need to see Michigan play somebody better than the teams they've played so far, and I need to see them win that game to believe in them. And Ohio State are in a bit of a transition year. They're still great because of Urban Meyer, but I still think that they're probably a year or 2 away from being a serious national championship contender again. So that for me, the top 4 are Alabama, Clemson, Washington, and Louisville.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think everybody sort of, to some degree, I think anyone that's a college football fan, and certainly the NCAA, would be rooting for Lamar Jackson to make that championship tournament and get some more matchups there where they could be looking at, Alabama's entire team, just looking at them as a talented standpoint. Jake Browning, Deshaun Watson, and Lamar Jackson. I think that they would love that. But as you point out, Michigan and Ohio State do play in their annual game to end the year, and most likely that will be a game where if Ohio State crushes Michigan, they're going to get credit for crushing a top 3 team, when it's like maybe they're just not a top 3 team, and maybe we're giving them too much credit for a win like that, and that's sort of what I'm interested in. The last thing that I guess I wanted to talk about was Donta Foreman, junior at Texas, running back. He's rushed quietly. I don't know if we've talked about him on here very many times, but quietly he has put up over 120 yards in every single game this season. And in the last 2 weeks, he's rushed for 591 yards. He rushed for 341 yards this weekend against Texas Tech. We know that Texas Tech has a historically awful defense. and then 250 yards the week before that for Baylor. Texas is sort of a team that we can at least point to and say, look, they produce running backs. There's no reason to think that they can't get one of the best running backs in the nation. But Foreman didn't produce in 2014. He was, sharing the ball, I think it looks like, in 2015, but he did average 7.2 yards per carry last year. And he seems to be that sort of classic, what you would expect a Texas running back to be, not a, dual threat type. And I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts on Foreman are, and if there's a fit there for Seattle at any sort of draft pick, and it's sort of interesting to see what they'll do next year in regards to their young guys like Alex Collins, like whether or not they like anything that they see out of Alex Collins, because they certainly haven't been playing him. And, Pete Carroll today said that CJ Prosise pretty much will be the lead back. So, as I've been saying for the last couple of weeks, Christian Michael is not playing well, and he is going to get demoted. And, at this point, he pretty much has been demoted. And when Thomas Rawls comes back, I honestly wonder if he'll be on the team anymore. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there and what they think of Alex Collins. But what were your thoughts on Foreman, Seattle, and the running back situation?
Foreman's a player that I end up talking about a lot in the comment section of the blog or on Twitter. I get asked a lot about him on Twitter. I have a hard time getting overly excited about him, and for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Big 12 is an absolute joke, and all of the teams have got bad. I mean, to say that the defenses are bad in the Big 12 is to suggest that the way that the Super Bowl ended between Seattle and New England was slightly disappointing. It's a horror show. And if anybody watched I've seen the highlights. I've not seen the full game, but I've seen the highlights. I've seen all of Foreman's big plays against Texas Tech at the weekend. I mean, I seriously think me and you, Kenny, could have got a good, or an explosive play out of the Texas Tech defense that day. I mean, he just kind of runs through them. I mean, he just runs past the defenders. The defenders have got their feet stuck to the ground. I mean, it's just awful. And whether it's Baylor or TCU or Oklahoma or West Virginia or whoever, Texas, the defenses are just a joke. I mean, they're an absolute joke. So production in that division, to me, means very little, because the bare minimum I'd expect from a running back in that conference is to be able to put up major yards. The second thing, he was a 2-star recruit who was basically a package for his brother. He's got a brother. I can't remember whether they're twins or something, but he's got a brother. I think it's called Monty Foreman, who was a 5-star recruit, and it was kind of like a package thing. They gave him, they recruited him as well to get the brother on board. They're both at Texas now, but he was never considered a major athlete in high school. The Seahawks have got a very specific physical profile that they've drafted a running back. It's generally about 5'10" to 6 foot. It's 220 pounds, 225 pounds. Explosive athlete. If you look at Robert Turbin, if you look at Christian Michael, if you look at CJ Prosise, the running backs they've taken relatively early, they've all had a certain degree of explosive athleticism. Foreman's a 2-star recruit, so it's not likely that he's going to set the combine alight. And the other thing is that from a size point of view, he's listed at 6'1" and 250 pounds. The Seahawks have not taken a running back who is 250 pounds. They've not had anybody who is that close to that size. So when I'm kind of putting this picture together, I just don't see a Seahawks running back. That's not to say that he's totally useless. I mean, he runs hard. He's an overachiever. It's hard not to admire somebody who's an overachiever. He does break tackles. There was that incredible play at the weekend where he kind of ran Marshall Lynch style with about 4 defenders hanging off the back of him, and then the Texas Tech guy, as he's crossing the line, steals the ball off him and then runs 100 yards and a fumble recovery and takes it the other way. It's one of the most amazing plays you will ever see in any form of football. But he's kind of got that physical style, and he drag defenders, stuff like that, finishes plays. But I can't get excited. I just can't get excited about him. And if the Seahawks draft him, great. I'll go back and say that I was wrong and that I should have taken him more seriously. But they don't draft players like him. They haven't drafted players like him. I don't really see anything about him that makes me feel they're going to start doing that. I think there are more preferable options. If Nick Chubb can get anywhere close to the athleticism that he showed at his Nike Spark Combine in 2013, then he's going to be so interesting to the Seahawks with his style and everything. There are one or two other running backs in this class that are really intriguing as well. I do not think that they have to go early on a running back. I think they could do, but I don't think they have to. And if Foreman's going to go in the first 3 rounds, I'm not convinced that he will be a Seahawk. But fun player, like to see an overachiever, and I know a lot of other people do like him a lot.
Well, that's it. Another 3,000 NFL mock draft in the books. For programming note, I think we're going to be switching this show over to the other podcast feed, RSS feed, which is currently titled Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur. This is not a ploy to get you to subscribe to my other channel. Just a decision for reasons of business-like decisions. So it's just something to do sort of streamline the 2 feeds that we have here into one, and then I'll probably rename that to Field Goals Radio or something like that. So just remember to subscribe to Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur if you want to get this podcast every week straight up delivered subscription style. And if you want us help on with donations to help so that we're because these streams do cost money, you can go to patreon.com/fieldgoals and just donate $1 or something like that. And so just pay attention to that. And as far as the show today and the state of the world that we live in, I can only quote Marshawn Lynch on Twitter 3 hours ago. Now come together like butt cheeks. Thank you for listening to 3000 NFL Mock Draft. Follow Rob Staten on Twitter at Rob Staten. Go to SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Follow us on Twitter at Field Goals. And, keep watching football if that's what makes you happy. Bye.